Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donohue, joined right now by Daniel Gallen, and we are fresh out of Beaver Stadium where we just watched Penn State finish its spring schedule on the football field. 15 practices in total dating back to March. We've had weekly looks. We've had weekly coverage over at Lions247.com. Of course, the spring game lets us peel back the curtain a bit more. A couple hours of action on the field, inter-squad scrimmage. It was a 10-0 game at the end of the day with Team Blue taking the win. And Daniel, at the end of the day, the scoreboard wasn't going to matter. If Penn State's going to finish 500 on Saturday. But what we want to know is a lot of the questions that can't be answered when we get our 10 to 15-minute practice looks on those Tuesday afternoon. And that is, what do these guys look like when the contact is ramped up and when the intensity is ramped up? And those are the kind of subjects we'll get into today. We got a couple MVP-worthy performances to talk about. Quarterback play obviously going to be in the spotlight. By the way, Penn State just picked up a post-game commitment. I'll address that. We got a ton of recruiting content at the site, but let's begin with the fact that, Daniel, spring camp's a wrap. What did you take away from today specifically?
Yeah, I think the big thing for this podcast is what we should set the over-under on commits during the 20 or 30 minutes that we're doing this at. But no, I mean, I thought today was a very nice bow to put on the past couple of weeks of what we saw. Like you said, it's a spring game. The final score is 10-0. You go 500 on the day. It's hard to take so much from the stats and the score. It's all about getting an extended look at these guys, which is really welcome after those small glimpses into the window. So, I think the first place I start, this defense looks as advertised, given everything that we kind of assumed, given who was coming back, who decided to come back, and what we expected out of guys potentially taking the next step. I think that what we saw on Saturday is a little bit of a preview for maybe how good this team can be, what they might be able to do, how disruptive they can be up front. I think when we talk about potential MVPs, we'll get into that a little bit more. But I just came away really impressed with the defense, a really solid unit. Obviously in the spring game scenario, you're not getting too exotic. I don't think we saw the Prowler package out there today. That's one of the things that was pretty straightforward. Base defense 4-3. Daquan Hardy coming on for the nickel. That was pretty much what we saw from Manny Diaz. But given the talent that is on that side of the ball, that talent really shined today.
It's a button-up bunch right now in year two with Manny Diaz. You think back to where this group was at the completion of spring ball in 2022. Zane Durant was the only new roster member that they had added since Manny Diaz took over. Of course, they lost a bunch of guys right when he was taking the job after the Outback Bowl, and such a different situation. Not only is Manny Diaz incredibly familiar with his personnel at this stage, but they're very familiar with him and what their expectations are, what the roles are. And guys, I think, have a strong feel, and it's going to be very important for team success this year that you don't have to start on this defense to be a big-time player for this defense. And that's going to get us right to our pick for defensive MVP, Denai Dennis Sutton. Look, he may not start a single game in 2023 as a sophomore, but he may end up leading this team in sacks. He may be one of the more disruptive defensive linemen in the Big Ten Conference if what we saw on Saturday and what we've heard he put together during the span of these 5 weeks carries into September and beyond. We're talking about a former 5-star recruit who didn't get to campus until last June. He talked about it after the game today. It really felt like he enrolled, and then all of a sudden training camp was around the corner and the first game was around the corner, and you're scrambling trying to figure that out as a college athlete, as a football player. He played in every game last season. He burned his red shirt, but it really sounds like he has found his footing this spring. He hit 3 sacks pretty early in the year last year before they got to October. That's where he finished. He had 2, and I think in real life football games where quarterbacks are going to be hit hard, he may have had 3 or 4 sacks on the day. Now, we have to put this out there. No Olu Fashanu at left tackle. We know that he's taken some work against him over the course of ball here. But a lot of times attacking from the right side, working against Caden Wallace and Drew Shelton. And those guys got their work today from Denai Dennis Sutton.
Yeah, I think that there's one play where Denai Dennis Sutton, pushed Drew Shelton, I believe, into Drew Aller's lap pretty much. I think Aller was still able to get the pass off. Maybe might have even completed it, but those were the types of reps that we were seeing, from Dani Dennis Sutton today. I think that when you look at the profile of a 5-star edge rusher, I think that coming in, I think there were pretty high expectations for what he would be able to do last year. I think that defensive end is, I think one of those positions where if you are a 5-star caliber guy, you can come in, and I'm not going to say it's easy to contribute right away, but it's a bit of a reasonable expectation. And, he got those 3 sacks in the fourth quarter of 2 non-conference games. And then, I think down the stretch, he was around the quarterback a little bit in some garbage time, but couldn't get him to the ground. So I think that he's someone who probably has a lot to prove. He does have Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac in front of him, 2 pretty accomplished and, pretty good defensive ends in their own right. So it's going to be interesting to see what that next step is for him. But I think that there's a lot of guys who we're looking to see what their next steps are. Zane Durant, Dani Dennis Sutton's classmate on the interior, he was in the backfield. Zariah Fisher, I thought, flashed a little bit after missing most of last season to injury. It's going to be a really interesting group. I'm really curious to see what this second step is for them, what they're going to be able to do this year.
Yeah, and you kind of phrased it playing behind those 2 vets and Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac. It might be more like playing alongside. I mean, last year we kind of viewed 3 starter situation with Nick Tarburton and Adisa Isaac and Chop Robinson. In that situation, Chop Robinson was the one who was left out of any starts. Finished the season with 0 starts, but certainly could have made the case that he was their most impactful edge rusher over the span of the entire year. And so maybe that's what it sets up for Dani Dennis Sutton. By the way, Amin Vanover, we always seem to overlook him in these conversations. And I don't want to do it today because I thought he did some really strong things. And whoever was at right tackle today, whether it was Drew Shelton, whether it was Caden Wallace, they were getting work. And I think that goes to show you what kind of a level of challenge that this offensive line, specifically those tackles, have faced all spring long. Dani Dennis Sutton, after this game, crediting Olu Fashanu for a lot of what he was able to do in making strides this spring. When you're facing a technician like that, someone that powerful, someone viewed as a potential number 1 offensive line prospect in an NFL draft, it's going to make you it's either going to make you fold up and feel bad about yourself, or it's going to make you break through and build some confidence. And it seems like it was the latter in the case of Dani Dennis Sutton. That was reflected in his effort today. Offensively, we'll get to the cornerbacks in a moment. Receiver was an area that we were waiting to see who's going to pop up. No one around this program wants to tell you much about anybody who's not named Harrison Wallace or Keandre Lambert-Smith this spring. Well, they had to talk about Omari Evans after this performance today. Team best 5 catches, 80 total yards. He was the only Nittany Lion to actually reach the end zone. He had a 28-yard touchdown on a pass from Drew Aller. Afterward, he took an excessive celebration penalty for spinning the football and did 50 up downs on national TV. Not exactly the way you thought it would play out, but better to learn that lesson than in a Big Ten matchup down the road. And Omari Evans, as James Franklin said afterward, stepped up in a situation where they were looking for a third wide receiver to step up. He also tipped his hat towards some of those younger wide receivers in that 2022 recruiting class. Caden Saunders, who had a nice day for himself, 4 catches, over 50 yards. And then Anthony Ivey got in the mix as well. I think he had 3 or 4 catches. He mentioned Malik McLean having a good day, but clearly when you look at wide receiver, trying to make sense of who could be that riser, Omari Evans is one of those that we have said, look, he's in that cluster, and he's probably in the top of that cluster with Dante Cephas coming to town and ready to shake things up. But Omari Evans said this will be a springboard for him going into the summer.
In talking about the younger wide receivers, I would also throw in Tyler Johnson's diving catch. Didn't get a second look at it, so who knows what the ball was doing. But from our angle, looked like a catch at the very end of the first half for a bit of a splash play by him. But I think that Omari Evans is someone that we kind of started to hear his name mentioned as that number 3 guy. It bubbled up a little bit, and it kind of makes sense when you think about his career trajectory. He came in last year as an early enrollee. He's still pretty brand new to playing wide receiver full time since he was a high school quarterback. But he burned that red shirt. he was on the field the last drive of the game in the Purdue game, because Mitch Tinsley had to tap out. So Omari Evans was on the field from the jump. Showed some chemistry with Drew Aller when Aller got in the second half of some blowouts early in the season. And while I think he finished with around like 5 catches for 55 yards and a touchdown somewhere in there last year, I think that you could kind of see that, okay, there's a development curve right here. This is someone that is taking those steps forward. Taylor Stubblefield, the ex wide receivers coach, talked a lot about, you didn't have to break any bad habits with Omari Evans. So it made it not easy to develop him, but it was a little bit different. It was a lot more focus on, building and creating instead of changing. And Omari Evans said that he's more familiar with the playbook. He's more familiar, with playing the position, and that's allowing him to play closer to his true speed, which I believe is in the 4.3s.
It's sub 4.4. Yeah, it's sub 4.4.
It's pretty legit speed. So I think that this is kind of the pieces coming together for him. I think that when you talk about spring game performances, when we were doing our MVP picks, we were kind of talking about how, sometimes it's guys you never hear from again. But I think that Omari Evans is someone that, given his trajectory, given what we saw from him last year and what we know, that he's someone that we'll be hearing from again this fall, whether it's as that third wide receiver or in some sort of rotation. I think that's something that we'll have to find out. And I think it's something that James Franklin really wants to know soon too.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of question about him solidly being in the top 6. They want to have 6 game-ready guys, and I don't know if we've quite seen that from the Penn State wide receiver core in the last several years to be able to confidently say you have 6. We know they have 2. They've made that very clear with what Harrison Wallace and Keandre Lambert-Smith mean to this offense. It's also very clear if you read between the lines and just talk away from the camera and away from press conference settings that they really think Dante Cephas is going to come in and be an immediate impact player, just like the reason he was the prize prospect out of Kent State. He'll be with this team in preseason camp. But yeah, Omari Evans, Caden Saunders got some juice going today. Sounds like he also was flying around in a different way he wasn't able to do last year, showing off that speed and being able to translate that in a college practice field. Because you mentioned it, a lot of these guys came to campus with great 40-yard dash times, but it takes a while to see that actually reflected on a practice field when you're playing against Power 5 defenses, working under the microscope of a Power 5 coaching staff, and dealing with all the pressures that go into that. You can be doing a lot of thinking, which slows up those steps. And it sounds like it's coming together for some of these wide receivers, which lends some confidence to Marcus Hagan's group. A lot to learn about them. Let's get to the quarterback position, because Drew Aller has not been named the starter. We know he's going to be the starter. As long as he's healthy, he's going to be the guy that trots this offense out against West Virginia, and people are going to be singing his praises as the potential next big thing to come out of Penn State. Got to look at him in Beaver Stadium today. Let me check the final stat line that they had on him. 19 of 30, 202 yards, 1 touchdown, no turnovers. He had a couple errant passes in the spring game last year when he made his Beaver Stadium playing debut. No turnovers, though, at all in any of his appearances with Penn State last season. So nice job protecting the football today. He faced quite a bit of heat in the pocket, which I think is going to pay off. I think he's been taking his lumps over the course of this spring, facing maybe the best defense he'll see all year long. And there was a separation today. I don't want to take anything away from who Bo Prabula is as a competitor. He's beloved in this locker room, and he certainly is a guy that they want to maybe get involved in some different ways on the field. They've made that very clear. But when we're talking about a 2-man quarterback race here, I get why they're leaving it open, and I completely understand that. And I don't want to take too much from 1/15 of the spring schedule. But this is our first chance to see both guys go against live defenses. And in Bo's case, our first chance to see that since he was playing high school football. So today you saw 30 passes from Drew Aller. I think you saw maybe some energy early, maybe that he was trying to reel in a little bit, maybe an excitable start to the game. But we saw some special throws from him from different arm angles. When the clock was an issue down in the second half, in the second quarter, you saw him make some really nice plays with the time being an issue. So I think with Drew Aller, you walk away and say he didn't light up the stat sheet. They didn't put up 40 points on offense, But I think you saw some of that composure come through. You saw some of that vision come through as he navigated through the pocket. And ultimately, you saw a clear separation atop this quarterback depth chart, which we thought might be the case. But everybody within the walls of the Lasch building has done a very good job in making it apparent that they see this thing as a competition and they want it to remain that way, leaving spring ball.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked what I saw out of Drew Aller today. I think that it was pretty, as advertised and in keeping with everything that we've heard behind the scenes this offseason. The super wow plays weren't really there, but I think that he's someone when you watch him, in the pocket, when he has that clean pocket and is able to really survey the field, go through his reads, and find the right guy. I mean, he just throws such a pretty ball. The way it comes out of his hands, it looks so easy. During pregame warmups, I saw him throw. He was at the opposing 45-yard line and threw it in the air to the goal line, so 55 yards. And the motion just looks so easy. It looks so, it looked like what it's supposed to look like. Caden Saunders was asked after the blue-white game, if there was any adjustment going from Sean Clifford to Drew Aller in terms of getting used to that velocity. And Caden Saunders said for him, there wasn't an adjustment because he and Aller are familiar with each other, going back to high school and, got a lot of work together. But he said that for some of the other guys who weren't as familiar with Aller, that there was a bit of an adjustment with how that ball comes in there. So, I think that, I understand why, Penn State and James Franklin are leaving this as an open competition. But I think that when you look, and then, like you said, you don't want to take anything away from Bo Prabula. And, in this type of setup isn't necessarily conducive to his athleticism and what he can do as a quarterback. And I think we saw some of that athleticism and when he had to scramble, when things broke down a little bit. But I think that you can just see how Drew Aller is a QB1, watching himself on the field, seeing, hearing him talk about things afterwards. And then just, looking at those plays. I mean, everyone's going to be talking about that sidearm throw, the most buzzed about 1 yard gain of spring. But, Drew Aller talked about after the game, 70% of the time, you have a clean pocket, or that's when you expect to have a clean pocket. But 30% of the time, you're going to have to make something happen. You're going to have to switch up your arm angle. Things are going to break down. You're going to have to scramble. He's someone who seems like he plays really in control and really knows what he's doing out there. Talking about Deni Dennis Sutton, he sees Deni Dennis Sutton crashing really hard on a read play. Dennis Sutton destroys Katron Allen in the backfield, but Aller pulled the ball and is, home freer on the left side. So, he did say he came out a little amped up. Wasn't necessarily the smoothest day, but I think that you saw a lot of things that you want to see when you're talking about, a potential QB1, for a team that has, CFP aspirations.
And what we didn't see that I really liked, and it's a little hard to tell when you got music blaring and we're up in the press box, but it seemed like the communication was on point between the coaching staff and the quarterbacks. And I'm just basing that off of the two quarterbacks that we saw play. Jackson Smolik, the freshman, attempted one pass in the afternoon. Then Dennis Sutton spent more time in the backfield than Jackson Smolik did in his debut blue-white game. But those two quarterbacks, I'll give there weren't any lapse moments. Sometimes on a practice field, you can see coaches say, hold on, we got to get it together. And they huddle up. And we just didn't get that today. And I was wondering, in front of a bit of a crowd at Beaver Stadium, not a very large one, but there's more of a spotlight microscope sensation as a quarterback when you're trying to direct an offense and there's moving parts and you got some players missing out there and you've got walk-ons involved. And it seemed to run pretty smoothly. That's a credit to the coaching staff and what they've done implementing their practice plans over the course of years and more recently in this spring ball window. But I thought that was good to see today. It was something I was going to be keeping an eye on. And Bo Prabula's final stat line, just to get back to that, 10 of 27, 92 yards, and an interception on the day. When we look at across the board here, who did not play, before we get to some guys who flashed, Hakeem Beeman, Kazai Izzard on the defensive line at tackle. Izzard's a guy that we didn't really get to see any involvement from in the pads during spring ball. James Franklin had forewarned us about that possibility. Also warned us that Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren came in a spring ball. recovering from bumps and bruises. We didn't see them at all in the last 5 weeks. That included on Saturday in terms of being in pads. Everybody that I'm mentioning was on the field. The transfer portal's open now, so I don't want to freak people out. Everyone I'm mentioning was on the field in jerseys, but not in uniform and not participating. Tyler Elsdon, Dom DeLuca at the linebacker position. That opened up some more room for some freshmen to get some run. Jalen Reed at safety, a couple of freshmen not available, and Zion Tracy at cornerback, offensive lineman Anthony Daka, and then offensive lineman Olu Fashanu. That's one that we've seen him seemingly be full go in our looks at practice, holding down that left tackle position. So with him out of that, we saw more Drew Shelton at left tackle as the next man up there. We know he's competing with Caden Wallace at right tackle, but he got some run back at left tackle like he did last year. With all that said, James Franklin, and this matches what we've heard all spring, there's confidence that those names going to be ready for come preseason camp, going to be ready to be the contributors there. But figured I'd run that list just to remind folks that it's a short-changed look at the 2023 Nittany Lions. We're not talking about a medical staff with the Penn State program trying to get guys ready to face Ohio State. This is, again, 1/15 of their spring practice schedule. And then throw on that you're going to be adding more than a dozen scholarship players via transfer, via freshman class in the upcoming months. Just a reminder, an incomplete version of the 2023 Penn State football team that we saw out there on Saturday.
Yeah, just to go back to the communication point with the quarterbacks and the coaches, I think the one time we might have seen that come up was right before halftime in the sped up 2-minute drill where Elliott Washington makes a great play to keep Katron Allen in bounds. It looked like, and then Drew Aller threw that pass to Tyler Johnson. I think it looked like James Franklin wasn't necessarily happy with how that ended and what exactly happened there. That's something to go back and rewatch. But
can we give those defensive backs some love real quick? Elliott Washington with a big hit, and Kate. It's not easy to force Katron Allen to do anything on a football field. So to make him sit down and keep that clock going says a lot about the physicality for Washington. We've heard a lot about it. Top 24/7 prospect at the cornerback position, using that physicality on the practice field, bench pressing receivers at times early in his college career out there, and then on that stick that we talked about with Johnson that was near the goal line. I think that was the play where Mekhi Flowers was able to fight through a block and come up with a stop. He had some help from defenders, but Flowers really made the play as he was working off of a block. Thought that was really impressive because he's a guy that you can kind of forget about a little bit because you can go 4 deep easy at safety about guys who are going to be playing big-time game snaps. I thought Mekhi Flowers had a good day. We'll talk about some more, but I just didn't want to get by those 2 references.
Definitely. I think that those were 2 really physical plays that we saw, and on a day when, I think that sometimes you don't know how much physicality you're going to see in this type of setting. But, in terms of the people that we're missing today, I think that I think Penn State is in a really good place in terms of the amount of personnel, where the roster is right now. I think that when we were at this point last year, there was a lot of changes that were still going to happen. I mean, Chop Robinson had pretty much just committed at this point a year ago, if I'm remembering correctly. Hunter Norzad wasn't on campus yet. You did have those freshman early enrollees, but like you said,
Abdul Carter, Denai Dennis Sutton, Drew Shelton, none of them were on campus when they played the 2022 Blue-White game. Maybe as visitors, but they were on the field. Yeah,
exactly. Like you said, Zane Durant was the only new face on the defense last spring. So, I think that what we saw today is going to be pretty similar to what we see against West Virginia on September 2nd. Like James Franklin said afterward, they're still looking at the transfer portal. There's still a couple positions that they're interested in. And if you're a good player, they're going to be interested in you just overall. But I think that where Penn State is now is what we're going to see in September. And I think that bodes really well when you talk about continuity and chemistry and how this team is coming together. It's nice when James Franklin says that he doesn't expect any of these injuries or things that had guys sidelined to really, linger into the winter or into the fall. But I think that you should feel really good about the health of this roster, both literally and then in the more figurative sense.
And remember last year as well, you lost Zariah Fisher for what we thought was going to be the season during spring practice. So you had a net of 0 in terms of what you added defensively with one guy on board and then losing another. very different forecast as this team heads into the summer. I mentioned some of those guys who flashed in the defensive backfield in general. It looked as strong as advertised. Johnny Dixon and Kalen King were the first cornerbacks on the perimeter. Daquan Hardy working in that slot coverage role. We're going to see a lot of Johnny Dixon there. They have the flexibility to bring Dixon inside, bring a guy like Storm Duck or Cam Miller, put him opposite of Kalen King. Elliott Washington gets that kind of run on the outside as well. And then at safety, look, KJ Winston validated a lot of the stuff that we continue to hear about him. I've been talking about it a lot last year. I think he ended up with 18 tackles last season, which doesn't look great on the surface, but he did that in like 110 defensive snaps. I mean, he was a high impact player when he had his opportunities to go do some things defensively as a freshman, which didn't come all that often while he burned his red shirt. And so to see him being able to roam around the field with a longer leash this year, he's going to have more responsibilities. He may end up starting. It doesn't really matter if he does at the safety position this year, but the physicality was on display. And what we've talked about a lot with KJ Winston is that wingspan, that range, the fits he could provide with you in coverage downfield, eliminating some of those windows for a quarterback. But what I really like about Winston and what we saw featured on the field today is he can come up from that second level and really attack and really turn one of those dump off passes to a tight end or a running back that can exploit you and end up being a 20-yard gain that moves the chains on third down. He can stop that in its tracks, and he can do it with some force.
I think I highlighted one play in my little post-game write-up where it was a pitch or a handoff to Katron Allen around the left side, and KJ Winston really just fired up, from the second or third level, split the blockers perfectly, was able to make the initial hit on Allen and, got him down or helped to get him down for, I think, a 2-yard gain. That was kind of the play that, watching it through the binoculars and really seeing it happen in real time, you kind of go like, oh, okay. Like, whoa, like that was like a pretty like perfect play in terms of the way it was executed, the way it was read. I think that, KJ Winston was my pick for defensive MVP going into it. I think that, given what we've heard from some of his teammates, he's someone who could really be in for a big role. What that role looks like is going to be really interesting, given that Penn State played 4 safeties a lot last year. And, kind of like what you talked about with Mekhi Flowers, you get down to 5 and 6 right now, and it's Tyrese Mills and Mekhi Flowers who, both of whom aren't really slouches either. Can
I say this, Daniel? 2 top 24/7 prospects join the party very soon. Dakari Nelson, who's 6'3" and can do a lot of safety, and then King Mack, who has world-class speed. So buckle up for this competition.
Yeah, I mean, KJ Winston mentioned them too in passing, where I asked him about the competition there, and he said that it's great and they're adding more to it. And I think that the way that this defense has turned out and some of the packages that they use, I don't necessarily think Manny Diaz and Anthony Poindexter are getting together and saying, okay, let's get a 4 safety formation so that we can get all these guys playing time. But I do think that the willingness of Terry Smith, Anthony Poindexter, and Manny Diaz just to get the best defensive backs onto the field at the same time, I think that really helps the safety room that Penn State has constructed. And I think that that's a position that going into the fall, it's going to be really fun to watch, really interesting to see what they're able to do.
Yeah, it was Ellis and Zakee Wheatley paired up as the initial safety tandem, followed in by Flowers and Winston. Just reiterating, Jalen Reed did not play in the blue-white game. We've often seen him run out there with the first team. Wanted to finish off and just in terms of guys, and we're going to have a bunch at Lions247.com in the coming days. We're going to get a second look at this because Big Ten Network aired it, and we usually don't get to see much of practice. Now we get to see an entire practice and pause it, and it's going to be pretty nice. And so we'll do that, and we'll work our way, and we'll have more notes from this matchup, and it'll inform our next podcast when we talk bigger picture about spring ball wrapping up and the questions that remain going into the summer. But I got to circle back to a guy I spent a lot of time discussing when we previewed this matchup, and that's Tony Rojas. He was my pick for defensive MVP. He ended up leading the team with 9 total tackles. He had a couple pass breakup along the way, but I thought both him and Tamir Robinson, who was largely working in a second-team role as a Mike linebacker today. Again, no Tyler Elsdon as part of the equation, but I thought they both showed up pretty well. Tony Rojas was no surprise, but Tamir, I wanted to see how he moved at that size. we've been kind of saying, are we just is the inevitable going to come down the line? He's going to end up as a defensive end in the blue-white game next year. I'm not so sure anymore based on what we've heard and what we've seen on the practice field. Watching him maneuver, navigate his way down the field in some pass coverage. He's got a lot to work on. He's got a lot to round out. He didn't play much high school football down the stretch of his career there. But I think Tamir Robinson is the kind of guy who, as he continues to build that momentum, figure out where he is as a football player within this defense, he could be on the rise come preseason camp and maybe work his way into the conversation. It's a crowded room. Getting DeLuca back, you're getting Elsdon back. You've already got Abdul Carter and Curtis Jacobs and Kobe King as guys who played significant Big Ten football. And I don't want to shortchange someone like Keon Wiley, who's trying to battle for his own career launch pad right now. But I thought coming out of this, those two linebackers, Manny Diaz said that he felt like they added two elite linebacker talents to the room with their early enrollees this year. I think Tony Rojas has stolen the spotlight for good reason. Come away from this thinking that they've got two guys they can work with long-term. And again, just based off a limited sample size, but really good early returns on a lot of these defensive signees.
And another top 24/7 prospect, I believe, coming in this summer with Kavion Keys from Virginia.
Yeah.
But you looked at that white team linebacker core today, and I thought it was one of the more interesting groupings when on that we saw, where you have Tamir Robinson in the middle at the mic, and then Tony Rojas and Keon Wiley on the outside. That's two freshman early enrollees and a redshirt freshman in Wiley. These are guys that, Wiley's obviously in a little bit of a different situation than Robinson and Rojas, but looking at that youth and thinking about, projecting this forward and thinking about, what does this unit look like, in 2-3 years? I think that those are three guys that you're really going to be thinking a lot about. I was really curious to see what Robinson looked like in the middle. I mean, he's so tall, so long. He doesn't really look like your prototypical Mike linebacker, especially what we've seen these past couple of years. When you talk about Ellis Brooks and then Kobe King and Tyler Elsdon. So I'm really, really curious to see, what that looks like, when we're, in November, when they're going through practice and he's had more time to develop, more reps. Does that get him onto the field? Is this in early enrollment a springboard for him? And then, I think Wiley is someone in rewatching that I'm going to try to keep a closer eye on. But then, Rojas leading the team in tackles, and it felt like he was around the ball a lot. It seemed like that he was there to help finish plays. He was in space. It seemed like a couple times, when Drew Aller and Bo Prabula were able to find guys in the middle of maybe a zone downfield, it seemed like it would be, behind Rojas in the corner in front of the safety. But, I did like what I saw out of Rojas, and this linebacker group is going to be, a ton of fun. I mean, there's one Abdul Carter play that I think was a sort of classic Abdul Carter play that I highlighted in the write-up where, Christian Driver flashes at the line of scrimmage for a screen along the sideline. Abdul Carter sprints to take him away. Bo Prabula gets flushed from the pocket. So Driver starts to run up the field and Carter breaks up the pass, down the field. And that was the thing that I just kind of, had my binoculars in the right place to see that unfold. But it was really like, oh yeah, this guy, really has it, is really a total package.
He's a bad man, Abdul Carter. And a lot of the conversation coming out of these spring games often is about what do the early enrollees look like? What do the year 1 to year 2 guys look like? And that's what a lot of this conversation has been. It's always a lot less of it is about focusing on those known commodities and some of the 4th and 5th year players. And we didn't see as much of some of them in the spring game, but we learned a lot more about some of the younger components of a roster. And let's face it, this young nucleus of second year players is a big part of the reason why people think Penn State is going to push for playoff consideration and maybe break through as a Big Ten title. Look, Daniel, we got a lot to focus in on, but 3 things that we do know are there's 3 captains. There's Keaton Ellis, Olu Fashanu, and Dom DeLuca representing the offense, defense, and special teams for this program. And that's more than we've known about the leadership of this team in quite some time.
Yeah, leadership was maybe the one thing that was asked about every single media availability. It felt like I don't even think Drew Aller got asked about every single availability. Um, we know what Penn State is replacing in terms of its leadership from last year. It has been interesting to really hear the assessment that there really aren't as many vocal leaders on the team this year, that it's really a lead by example type of thing. James Franklin used the numbers where he was like, last year you might have 4 to 6 super vocal guys, whereas this year you'll have 12 to 16 guys who are less vocal, but that's kind of the same effect. And I'm really curious to see what that looks like. But when you talk about those three guys, Fashanu, Ellis, DeLuca, I don't believe we've talked to DeLuca yet this year or in a while. Maybe he was available. I forget. But in terms of Fashanu and Ellis, I think both of them were pretty honest about how it doesn't come naturally to them, that they were people that really have to step up and be more vocal. I think even with us, Ellis kind of showed it just by how much more long-winded he was on a Zoom call that we had earlier this week. In the past, he was someone who, was pretty, seemed guarded, generic more or less. But I thought we got some really good insight for him and from him earlier this week, and I think that's someone kind of feeling more comfortable speaking. Speaking to us, speaking behind the scenes, and then I think that Olu is someone who has a lot of clout in that locker room right now. I think the fact that he could have gone pro, could have been a top 10 pick, didn't, and is back. I think that those actions speak really loud, and then he can really put words behind it now. When Omari Evans was doing the up downs, Olu walked over to him. I think that he is someone who is going to be really, really important to this locker room, really important on the leadership side of things.
And for Keaton Ellis, the hometown kid,
Yes.
he could ride his bicycle over to Beaver Stadium anytime he wanted as a kid. And now to be a Nittany Lions team captain, that's special. And Dom DeLuca, he's 2 years removed from joining this squad as a walk-on. He
An
just
injured
got on
walk-on
scholar.
at that.
Right, an injured walk-on whose initial landing spot was uncertain, and now here he is as a component on the defense and a special teams captain. And maybe he's the next number 0. We know that that's going to be given to a special teams ace in the fall. But 3 captains on board right now, according to James Franklin. We can probably expect another 3 coming in August for each phase of the game. So something to stay tuned there. This is the earliest that I've ever heard any kind of team captains announced by James Franklin while covering Penn State. So maybe they felt they wanted to get out in front of it, establish some of that leadership, anoint some of those guys, and moving forward, whatever the cause was, they announced that today. By the way, Caleb Brewer announcing he is going to be a Nittany Lion, joining the 2024 Penn State recruiting class just as we were sitting down to record this episode. A huge, huge weekend for recruiting purposes, and it's really just getting started. Tyler Calvaruso was on this podcast. We set the over-under at 3.5 for combined basketball and football commitments between Saturday and through Sunday night, and he took the over. So Tyler seems to have a good sense. He doesn't seem to be nervous about that right now on Saturday night, and we've got one on board now with Brewer from the same high school in Reading, Pennsylvania, Wyomissing, as Javen Williams. So this is a repeat trip to that same program, bringing a player from the same position unit in Brewer, another offensive line addition, considered a top 10 player in the state of Pennsylvania, 6'4", 275 pounds, full coverage of his commitment at Lions247.com. And we have a ton of recruiting to get to on our next episode of the podcast from whatever continues to happen coming out of the blue-white game event. And also as players start to shape up their plans for official visits and commitments are going to be locked up and lining up in a hurry now. Daniel, anything to add before we wrap up this post-game edition, our first post-game podcast since we were out in Pasadena?
No, we made it through unscathed. No more "we are better" tweets in the past 40 minutes or so. But I'm sure that there is plenty more to come on both the hoops, and I think there's going to be some news on the basketball front in the coming days as well.
All right, good time to jump on board with Lions 24/7. VIP access is 50% off for an annual subscription through April 18th. So get on board now. Get the best of the blue-white game coverage coming out of this event, and then we got you ready to roll with the transfer portal window really taking shape now over the next week and a half, 2 weeks in college football. Penn State's going to be involved there. On behalf of Daniel Gallen and our entire coverage team, including Mark and Grace Brennan, who were at Beaver Stadium getting it done, check out their photo gallery. Check out our videos from after the game, all up at Lions247.com. Stepping aside for now, I'm Tyler Donohue. We'll talk to you real soon.